So thank you for this opportunity to talk about our research on the future of English technology and their relationship to issues of equality, diversity and inclusion. Our focus will be on higher education and specifically on the region that you can see on the map there, the East and South Asia region, which of course contains the major countries like China and India that we are focusing on, but also Indonesia and Bangladesh are part of our project. So this presentation has been prepared by myself, Saraswati, and also Philip Sargent, who is part of the team but wasn't able to join us today. And our work is supported by the British Council. So just to set the scene, I'd like to say something about the work of the British Council in terms of the future of English, because we're working with them in this major initiative. The project we're talking about is part of that large-scale investigation into the future of English. And their work goes back to the last century, actually, because a long time ago, the British Council commissioned David Graddol, who was a linguist working at the Open University, to survey the current position of the English language and English language education around the globe. The context for that was that during the 20th century, English had emerged as a preeminent international language. And by the turn of the millennium, it was estimated that around 2 billion people knew or used English to some extent. So it had become an international lingua franca for communication about everything, really, from pop culture to international diplomacy. And of course, it acquired the status of a global language, arguably the global language. So an organisation such as the British Council obviously has a vested interest in this situation, since its job is to promote the English language, British culture and history. But there had been a growing body of research examining how different varieties of English, and particularly post-colonial varieties, had developed into distinct versions of the language in their own right. And it was in that context that the British Council commissioned David Graddol to look at the global status of the language, to identify trends and how the status was likely to develop in the future, and what this might mean for education around the world. Of course, a lot has changed in the past 2 decades. There have been huge geopolitical changes and also huge technological changes. So the British Council thought it would be a useful exercise to reappraise the status of English around the world and ask questions such as, what role does English now play in nations and communities around the world? How does this role affect people's lives and people's life chances? Is English an important skill that can contribute to social mobility? Does it provide a means for building a more equitable society, or perhaps the opposite? Is it a factor in the maintenance or the creation of inequalities in society? So these are some of the major issues that are being addressed through the initiative. And the British Council has identified a large number of predicted trends in terms of what's likely to happen in the years ahead. And it's currently engaged in discussions around the world about these predicted trends. And our research is specifically focusing on a small number of these trends. So on this next slide, you can see at the top, the 3 trends that we are focusing on in our research. So the first one's about online English language learning being a huge growth area around the world. The second one is I suppose the assumption that more emphasis is and will be given to equality, diversity and inclusion in teaching, learning and assessment. And the third one is around the role that digital technologies have in enabling access to English language learning, particularly for those who are currently excluded from those opportunities. So in addition to the British Council's predictions of upcoming trends, we ourselves have our own ideas about the future, and we're particularly interested in the growing role for informal, incidental learning of English, the ways in which students currently encounter different kinds of English, particularly on the internet. And also, we are interested in any changes to language assessment that might occur when digital and mobile technologies are used in teaching and learning. So combining all these different ideas has been quite challenging for us, but really fascinating. And really, when we think about researching the future of English, we realize that there are so many different aspects involved. Of course, English as a medium of instruction, a global language, the role it plays throughout people's lives, different ways in which they use it at school, university, perhaps in their work, and so on. How English is learned is diversifying immensely, and how the digital technology supports those learning processes is changing. Um, Digital technology use itself shapes the evolution of the English language, its local varieties, and its role as a linguistic resource alongside other languages. And then there are those issues around equality of access, the gender divide, the digital divide, and what might be the policy and practice implications for these various developments in English, how it's used and its status. So it's a very rich field of investigation. And so now I come to the project that is supported by the British Council, which we started last year. Its title is English for the EDI Generation, Predicting and Tracking the Role of English and Digital Mobile Technologies in Higher Education across East and South Asia. So what are we doing? We're working with partners in those 4 countries of China, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and India. And we are investigating stakeholder perceptions and experiences concerning both the current and future roles of English and technology in higher education. But we are also interested in differences between experiences at school and then in higher education. We think there will be some differences to discover there. And our focus, as we said, is on issues of equality, diversity, and inclusion. We have a blog. If you have time, you are welcome to have a look at it. Our partners have started to write for this blog and are describing their local context, and it's really very interesting to read about those. The short name for our project is Modish, a name that we made up signifying Mobile Digital English. And here's the project team. So we're leading this project at the Open University, and we have local partners. Around 20 universities are involved in this project overall, because we have our partners in the 4 target countries, and they themselves are working with 4 or more other universities in each country. In addition to that, we have NGOs involved, we have English language associations and IT companies and other stakeholders involved in this project. And they're coming on board gradually as we develop our research instruments and so on, which we'll talk about in a minute. So these are all our wonderful colleagues who are involved in the project, and really we rely on them to such a large extent in terms of understanding the local cultures and contexts of English language use. So in this project, we're working in each target country in a number of phases. The first phase, which has been completed, involved a literature review and identifying the higher education communities that we wish to work with, the universities. The second phase we are in currently, and this phase involves collecting those perceptions and accounts of experiences from the stakeholders and well, predominantly, of course, the students and the teachers in higher education, but also the policymakers and others. And we have a, a phase of a current phase of data collection and further data collection planned for next year. So a sort of two-phase, two-stage process. And we're planning to use ecological system theory to reflect on our findings on the impact of the growing use of technology on the regional and local ecologies of teaching, learning and assessment of English. Phase 3 will then consist of drawing out implications for policy, pedagogy and research, and particularly how to address any EDI issues that we discover through our work. Excuse me. And we have numerous planned outputs, which actually we will talk about further at the end of this presentation. Some findings from our literature review. So the literature review actually involved our partners. So it's been a collaborative process of identifying literature and then guiding our partners to undertake a local literature search as well as that more global one, looking at all kinds of different types of literature, not just academic, but also, for example, reports produced by NGOs and also policy documents, and preparation of narratives describing the current state of play in their context. So what we find in the literature is that there are many critiques of the ways in which English and languages, perhaps more generally, standardized versions, so standardized English or native speaker English. So it's still an ideology that is very much in the forefront, but is being critiqued. Also, there's growing research on ways in which the language is used, how people interact, communicate with each other, and and we've also found that in terms of how cultures, English language cultures are represented is quite limited in terms of English language materials and lessons. The other point is about the impacts that the new technology is having and will have on people's communication habits, the ways in which it's integrated into their everyday lives, and so will have a notable effect on the role of English. So these are some of the sort of major themes emerging from the literature review. And then particularly we have the regional perspectives as well on trends in English. So at a regional level, we can say that the Asian region has witnessed increased emphasis on the use of English in education and in daily life. It's seen as an essential language, but different countries have their own perspectives. So, for example, some countries emphasize the needs of business and diplomacy. Others look at it as a means to unify multilingual societies. Others still emphasize that English is a crucial means to higher education. So the geopolitics and ideologies in these countries, of course, vary, and they influence the views on the adoption of English, particularly in higher education. There are some ambiguities there, with some Asian countries being more open towards its adoption and others being less open to its adoption, perhaps concerned about Western cultural dominance in education. There are also some concerns around the dominance of the English language teaching, its sort of its place in its dominant place in the ecology of local language learning and teaching, and a lack of equity or equality in learning the language, opportunities to learn the language. Finally, the literature tells us that there are discrepancies about between what the policy what the policies state around the use and teaching of English and what actually happens on the ground. So we are going to investigate all that through our project. And I'm now going to hand over to Saraswati, who will tell you more about the project itself, the detail of our investigation, starting with the research questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Agnes. Yes, we have like 4 main research questions, as you can see. Like first 3 questions particularly focus on stakeholders' perceptions of English language and digital mobile technology, whereas the last question focuses on students' experience of using English and technology. So to be more specific, as you can see here, the first question looks at stakeholders' perspectives of or the perceptions of equality, diversity, and inclusion, including gender equality issues in teaching, learning, and assessment of English in higher education. The second question focuses on stakeholders' perspectives on the roles of digital mobile technology in teaching, learning, and assessment of assessment of English in higher education. Then the third question explores, stakeholders' views about the roles and values of the English language in the next 10 years in their communities, particularly in relation to other languages used at university and in their communities. And also it looks at the roles of English in, providing better career and life opportunities and in creating an equitable and inclusive society. And the last question explores students' experience of using how students' experience of using English and digital mobile technology change from high school to higher education. So that's how we have 4 different research questions. Next slide, please. We are going to use, we have used a mixed method research design, particularly a time series longitudinal design with an interval of 13 to 15 months. So we are collecting data in 2 different phases. And in both the phases, we are using 4 different methods to collect data for our study. So they include a survey, focus group discussions, Padlet discussions, and interviews. So in the first phase, we have started collecting data for our first phase. So in this phase, we are conducting a survey with undergraduate students and their teachers. So the students are from 4 disciplines: business, humanities, science, and medicine. And we have selected 4 to 6 universities in each target country. And the universities are selected, they are purposely selected for this study. We are also conducting interviews with 20 teachers, and then we will also conduct focus group discussions with 72 students and a Padlet discussion with 60 students. And in terms of the survey responses, number of survey responses, Our target for student survey is 6,000, and for teacher survey, it is 240. And now we are collecting data for the first phase. So we'll go back to the field. We will go back to the same group of students and teachers after 13 to 15 months. And in the second phase, we will be repeating all the activities that we have done now. Additionally, we will interview some key stakeholders in the target countries. So they include representatives from NGOs and INGOs that work in education, in the field of education, educationists, IT companies, and policymakers. We will interview them in each country, in each target country, I mean. Yeah, next slide, please. We have a wide range of stakeholders in our study. So they include teachers and students from higher education, NGOs and INGOs that focus on education, teacher associations, internet service providers, IT companies, and policymakers. And it's important for us to work with a wide range of stakeholders in our study because our study is guided by ecological system theory, which looks at, how different layers of factors that exist in a society collectively affect human behavior. The theory that we are using has two dimensions. So population dimension and system dimension. And then the interaction between the two systems. So it looks at the interaction between the two different systems. That's why we are using the term ecology of language here in our study uh, to reflect on several social aspects of language speakers, and we also explore dynamics of interactions and coexistence of languages in the society with a primary focus on the English language. Next slide, please. Yeah, to be honest with you, we have faced several challenges in our study. Like the challenges are basically around, instrument design, data collection, and bringing our partners on board. So in terms of the instrument design, when we were designing our survey instrument, the questionnaire, our partners who are from 5 different countries, they came with so many relevant questions. They are very important and relevant, but we could not include all the questions because our survey became too long. So we had to remove some of the questions, though they were very important and very, relevant to our study. Similarly, we were interested to know about the ethnic background of our participants. But we realized that any classification used in the UK would not be automatically applicable in partners context. And also we found that people in our target countries, they come from mixed background. That's why it was a challenge for us to define, the term ethnic group, ethnicity there. Another challenge was associated with the terms equality, diversity, and inclusion. In our study, we are focusing on equality, diversity, and inclusion. That's why we wanted to include a question around that. But we found that the terms are not necessarily widely understood, and we also realized that the terms have different meanings in different contexts. That's why, and also it was difficult for us, and then we had a very limited space in our instruments, in our survey. But we do hope that we will delve deeper into the issues when we run, focus group discussions and faculty discussions with our participants. And another challenge for us was, to make our instruments suitable for all the participants. As you know, that our participants are from 4 different countries, and they are from 4 different disciplines. So it was a challenge for us to design a kind of common question for all the participants. And since we are focusing on inclusion issues, it is important. We thought that it is important to know about the socio-economic background of our participants. That's why we wanted to include a question, and we even developed a very good question to collect background information of our participants. But one of our partners, she showed her concerns about the use of that question, because she indicated that if we include that question, there might be some political issues in her country. That's why we had to drop that question, from the survey. And then we have included one disability question, but it was very difficult for us to define the term, because we found that, it has different meanings actually in different contexts. So that's why, like, we have provided a kind of common definition. So yeah, these were the challenges we faced when we were designing our research instruments. Then now we have a challenge related to participant recruitment for our qualitative studies. Initially when we submitted our proposal to the British Council, we had a plan to select a subsample of survey participants for our qualitative studies. But we received very few responses. We requested survey participants to contact us if they are interested in follow-up interviews and discussions. But we received very few interest, but so now we are going back to the universities, and then we are requesting them to help us in recruiting participants for the qualitative studies. So we have to change our plan actually. And then another, I think this is the biggest challenge for us, is, bringing our partners and their research associates on board. Like as Agnes has already mentioned, we are working with partners from 5 different countries, and we are collecting data from 4 of them. And in each country, we have one national researcher, and each of the national researcher is working with 2 to 5 research assistants in their respective countries. And then it has been a big challenge for us, to bring all of them on board, to make them understand what we are doing, what we are interested in, what kind of data we are collecting, how can we follow a rigorous process to collect data and analyze it. And also we found that they have different understandings around ethics, and they have different safeguarding procedures. The safeguarding procedures or principles that are available in the UK don't work in their context. So it's been a challenge for us to make them understand about understand the issues around ethics and safeguarding. That's why we are organizing workshops for our field researchers and for our partners. Next slide. So where are we now? Then yeah, here, like as we told you before, we have already started collecting data for our first phase. We have launched both the surveys, student survey and teacher survey. So it's and then we have already received 4,000 plus responses to our survey, student survey, and I think 250 plus responses to our teacher survey. Actually, in the teacher survey, we have reached the target, but there is not an equally spread across the 4 countries. I think our partners have also started interviewing teachers, and they have also and they have started conducting focus group discussions with the students. But we have not started, conducting Padlet discussion. We have a plan to conduct Padlet discussion with 15 students in each target country. And because like here, we found that our partners don't have prior experience of running or conducting Padlet discussions. That's why we wanted to organize a workshop for them. So we are going to organize a workshop for our partners next week, I think next Wednesday, and then they will start their data collection. So we have already published 4 blog posts, and we have our own blog page. Here is the link. And then we have also organized a workshop for our field researchers on research ethics. And our focus was on data collection, informed consent, data storage, data analysis, safeguarding. And then what we did was, we organized one common workshop, and we brought all the partners and their research associates together. I think nearly 20 participants attended that workshop. And then after that workshop, because we realized that they have different challenges, they have different practices. So we thought that it's better to discuss their challenges separately. So we organized separate meetings with our partners. So that's what we did actually to make them ready for the data collection. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, in terms of the outcomes, engagement, and impact, as Agnes has already mentioned, the British Council has taken an initiative. I mean, this is a global initiative of tracking trends in English. So one of the main objectives of our study is to contribute to their global initiative. So we want to contribute to that global initiative. We are also hopeful that we will be able to produce new knowledge about ecologies of languages and technologies in higher education and beyond. We also want to make sure that our study has some impacts on the research communities. So we aim to offer policy and practice level implications that may help to bridge the gap between policy and practices in teaching, learning, and assessment of English in higher education, particularly in the research countries. We are also hopeful that we will be able to raise people's awareness of students in equitable access to English language learning and digital technology, and then to co-create new opportunities for improved access. So we particularly hope to contribute to reducing gender inequalities in terms of their access to technology and opportunities to learn the English language in the target countries. That's why we have planned to organize a number of impact activities. They include, as you can see, like co-creation workshops with stakeholders, evidence cafes, policy briefs, blog post, toolkit on inclusion. We have a plan to produce a toolkit on inclusion that mainly for students and teachers. And we will organize project dissemination events in all the 4 target countries. And then we'll produce podcast, video-based open educational resources, and then it's very very common that we will also be presenting at different conferences. So we have a number of impact activities, and then we have already, as I mentioned before, we have already published 4 posts on our web page. And then we have a plan to organize a co-creation workshop with our stakeholders very soon. So first, we are now collecting data. Then after we have preliminary findings from our first phase data, we will organize a co-creation workshop with the stakeholders. We do hope that the co-creation workshop with our stakeholders will help us to understand, our research issues better. Yeah, thank you so much for listening to us, and would love to have your questions or comments, please. Yeah, thank you.